okay, cool. So when I came out here and I started to teach over San Francisco State, he was in my interview. He was like, you know, Candace?
That's so funny.
Yeah. So it's
the world is so small.
So small, so small. So let's go ahead and get started. This is a moment of truth. I'm your professor and host, Jason Seals. I want to introduce our guest. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
How you doing? Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Ifetayo Flannery. I'm here with you from Africana Studies at San Francisco State University.
Good to have you. So in the tradition of Africana Studies, Black Studies, African American Studies, let's get into the truth, right? Tell me, why is African psychology important?
Okay, boom, that's a very good question. Maybe, you know, the first thing to ask is, you know, what is African psychology? I feel like I want to state that clearly. So it's not just like Black people who do psychology. What's very interesting and very profound about African psychology, which is something we inherit as Black people, is that, you know, we've had a science around psychology since the beginning of time. And so the founding of what we now call Black psychology actually happened in 1968, 69, the same time we emerged with Black studies. But the intellectual tradition of African psychology actually goes back to ancient Kete, to the Nile Valley civilizations. So we just have this huge paradigm and historical sciences of how we understand human behavior, the mind, but really the study of the soul. That's what makes African psychology different from Western psychology. You take any regular Psych 101, blah, 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 and you ask the student, you know, what do you think this class is? And people often say, I ask them in my intro to psych classes, what do you think you're gonna learn? And they say, you know, study the mind, study people, study how people think. And I'm like, you know what I'm saying? That's Western psychology, which in fact you have answered that question properly. African psychology is noted by Baba Wade Nobles and others to specifically be the study of the human spirit and the expansion of human consciousness, which is way different from studying pathology, the malfunctions of human behavior and disorders. And so why do we need African psychology? It's literally because it is a study dedicated to, one, making all things that are African normal as the baseline of our science, but two, it is the study of our ability to progress while also elevating our traditions, the study of human consciousness and expansion. So it's really a more holistic study of a people and what's advantageous for us. And that is why it will never be unimportant.
Absolutely. It resonated with me. I remember being in school. I studied psychology, Western psych. I remember learning about Freud, Erickson, you know, all these different theories.
All these weirdos.
Right, all these theories. And none of it really resonated with me. I was trying to figure out, as a young brother, grew up in Oakland, like, how is this relevant to me? They weren't factoring in race. They weren't talking about capitalism. They were really talking about some of the social issues that we deal with daily. And it didn't resonate with me. And I was trying to figure out, how do I take this back to my community? Because the whole reason I even studied Western psych was to offer healing, right? I had been working in youth development for years, and I've been running camps, supporting young Black people around racism, sexism, and violence. And so you begin to work with young people and all this trauma comes up. So I'm like, okay, I need to go back to school and get a degree in psychology. I started learning a lot of these things, and I'm like, I don't really know how this is going to get my people to a point of healing.
The best thing that Western psychology has accomplished is the ability to diagnose problems. Black people don't need no more of that. We need answers to problems.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
I think we, I think we already have a lot of the diagnoses. I think sometimes when folks take Western psychology courses, they learn language, right? But it's also their language, which I think is also problematic in itself. And that's what I appreciate about, you know, the work of Baba Wade, Dr. Bobby Wright, you know, Dr. Amos Wilson, Dr. Linda James Myers. They're offering new language. Right? When Dr. Linda James Myers talks about optimal health, the first time I heard that, I was like, what?
That makes perfect sense.
Right? And then when she breaks down the formula around optimal health, I'm like, okay, your own worldview, right? And so when we start even talking about worldview, it's in my classes, I'm often challenging students to think about what is your worldview. So I have them choose their values, right? What is their top 10 values? And I have them rank them. And so I talk about where'd you get these values from? Then I talk about like how do those values begin to shape how you see the world, how you process what you believe to be a value. A lot of them never think about it like that. And so I have to, you know, start using examples like when you watch CNN, that's a worldview.
That is.
Right? When you spend your money on Jordans, that's a worldview.
Right.
When you buy an Apple product, that's a worldview. And so what is your worldview and where'd you get it from? And so when we start talking about that there's a different worldview out there outside of just, you know, Western society, white America, sometimes folks are baffled like, I didn't know there was another worldview. Right. So then when I'm reading or when I'm offering students to read, you know, Dr. Linda James Meyer's work, they're like, never thought about it like that.
That's right.
You know?
I think taking some of the most basic things becomes radical in a sense, and we look at the work of a lot of Black psychologists, African psychologists, like Linda James Myers literally just said, we should look at African Americans as the model of healthy behavior for all of humanity.
Right, because it's the origin. We're the origin.
Like, no one ever says that, and so it's like a basic premise, but to people it's so radical because we've been so indoctrinated to believe that African Americans are the worst people to model behavior after. And she says, of all the people in America, these people who have survived such targeted terror and oppression and still remain humane to others, still remain intellectually driven and creative, why are they not the model for our behavior, for even all humanity, not just other Black people? It's basic stuff, but literally to uproot oneself out of suffocating under like Western behavior and Western norms creates a new opportunity for us to be free. Right.
You know, when you read about African psychology, it talks about liberation.
All the time.
I think, and this has been my experience as an instructor teaching African psychology, even the introduction of that information is liberation for our young people, for my students, because it's almost a point where they're first of all, a lot of them come in and they kind of go to what you alluded to, which is, oh, there's a Black psychology because of the white psychology, like as though it's just a response to. And I have to offer, you know, greater context, historical context, and say, no, actually, as you talked about, it existed in ancient Kemet, like the foundations of it, right? And that as a study, as a practice, you know, looking at what was happening during the late 60s and how it unfolded. But when we start talking about, you know, some of the theories, and I break down the school of thought, you know, looking at, you know, some of the early African psychologists that were more aligned with Western psych, and a lot of their endeavors were kind of, you know, refuting what was coming from white psychologists, the ABPsi, you know, and then getting into some of our radical folks that are saying like, we're not even trying to deal with what y'all talking about. It's irrelevant, and we're really just trying to focus on our healing. And we know the epicenter of that healing is Africa. Right? So that part, when I start introducing that to them, that begins to resonate with them in different ways. Like, I didn't even think we could even have this type of conversation.
That's right.
You know?
I even tell students when they get into my Intro to Black Psychology class, which is what I teach at State, I say, how many people in here are psych majors? It's usually a few.
Right.
I said, I just want to let y'all know that whatever psychology courses you've already taken has not prepared you for this class. Right. And so it's a level playing field. If you ain't never took psychology in your life, or if you've taken only Western psychology, you are equally prepared for this class. Because it's a fundamental different approach to knowledge. Even what the subject of study is fundamentally different. And that's the only way that we will produce different results. I mean, it makes me think of Carter G. Woodson. I love to quote him. He's still not wrong from 1933 to now. Right. You know, he questioned education and he said, if we are not, you know, studying in ways where we are equipped to solve our own problems, then what contribution to civilization do we have? He said, if all we can do, and I'm quoting him, paraphrasing, if the best we can do is to model white people to be good at the things they have produced,
right,
then we literally have produced nothing new.
right.
That's heavy.
But I think what it is, and I think what happens is our parents, our grandparents, our loved ones, fictive kin, whoever is in our lives, they want us to be successful. So sometimes them wanting us to be successful is
to take a path that's
already been there,
paved,
or sometimes we associate success with whiteness.
Absolutely.
Right, and so then it be modeled this, but I challenge that because that success is often grounded in finances. Success,
and actually a very limited, you know, ability for Black people to achieve success. I mean, I think that's the big game, is that even if we follow the instructions in this capitalist society, it has been predetermined that only so many of us will get to a certain place, which is why economically, if we look at Black wealth over the last 250 years, as many people have stated, it literally hasn't moved hardly 1%.
Yeah.
And so even if we say, you know, for mother, for father, I know you want me to be successful, and you're saying that education or being a business person or whatever is the way, then we would have to literally be accepting that we're choosing a way that has proven false scientifically and statistically for 200 years.
Yeah.
We have to face that.
We do, but I think that we have to face that, but I also think there's a question around values that are centered around whiteness that also begins to make us think more about why we need to shift our worldview. Right? Okay,
let's go.
Because, so for instance, when a parent often sees someone that's successful, and they tell their child, oh, you need to be like such and such. And usually what they're pointing to is not the moral character, not the spirit. They're pointing to what he or she owns, what they drive, what they obtain. I think that's part of the problem. Our worldview around success, around achievement, is often grounded in material things. And material things, you know, that's where people get their status from. But as African people, our status has never been grounded in material things. It's been relationships, spirituality, things of that nature.
Absolutely.
And I think that fundamentally, that's why the worldview shift is needed. We're still grounded in these Western ideas. And I think that's when I think about my students that are coming to my classroom, I'm still dealing with those thoughts. Like, even the reason why they're here, they're not here necessarily to grow themselves holistically. Like, school should grow you, right? Some of them are here like, I've got narrative that if I come to class, I get a degree, I'm gonna make money.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying money's not needed to succeed in this society. We know that. But I've yet to have any student introduce themselves and say, I'm here today because I want to grow myself. I want to be my best self.
Right.
Knowing that that's what this space and it's in the way that it's used properly should do. It should grow you spiritually, emotionally, mentally. It should help you on that path. I always tell students, you come to my class, if you invest in yourself, you're going to get the grade that you desire. But you're also going to walk out a different person. That to me is way more important than any grade that you get. Because I also know, because I've been teaching for so long, and I'm sure you can attest to this, you can come to class and get an A and not learn nothing. Based on how certain instructors set up their classes. Sometimes it's regurgitation, sometimes it's memorization. And I always tell my students, if you come into my class trying to remember something, that's what my son does. He's 5. We need synthesis in here, right? We need a high level of learning. If you do what my son is doing, you're cheating yourself and you're cheating me as well, and your class. Right. You know, so that worldview piece is so important to me, and I think that's why African psychology resonates with me in a different type of way, because it challenges worldview in so many levels.
That's right.
And it makes us think about spirit differently, because spirit is valuable. What we know, though, in Western society, and now only recently, maybe over the last 20 years, that Western psych has begun to look at spirit in a different type of way. But for a long time, academia, Western psych, if they couldn't quantify it, if they couldn't measure it, it didn't exist, it wasn't important.
Right.
But we've always thought differently.
Yeah, I think that's a big piece actually too that differentiates African psychology from Western psychology anyway, is that one of the fundamental characteristics of even approaching the way one thinks is to understand their spiritual relationship to people and other things and to their ancestors.
Yeah.
And so even the idea that to think about spirituality as science, as real, as hard fact, as the impetus that affects people's social behavior, if we go the social behavior route, it gives us a whole different pantheon to work with than Western psychology. And what people don't realize is that, you know, there is no comparison to Western psychology because it's so limited. Like, it can only take us to a place, again, of just identifying either the type of behavior we wish to have, which is desired behaviors, which is why we have pharmaceutical medicines and laboratories, or the type of behavior we don't wish to have, which is diagnosing people. But there are no pathways to how to be like a whole human or how to be your optimal self. You don't even come to know yourself when you take Western psychology. So how could you answer, who am I? And so that's fundamental to African psychology, is the who am I, and the I is a plural.
Right.
You know, because that's also an African value. When they said know thyself, and they etched it into every arc in the pyramids in ancient Kemet, what people don't realize is that the thyself was a plural self. So it wasn't just the individual. Knowing thyself, by extension, meant knowing your legacy, knowing your ancestors, knowing your society, knowing who you are in your family and what role you play. There is no study of the individual outside of the community.
Yeah.
How could you possibly come to who you are without a relationship to anything else?
Yeah.
And this is where Westerners have gotten it wrong. And we literally have participated in something that has a false logic. And there's only so far you can go. You have to, as an African person, or really anyone, ultimately, to get answers to the questions of life, default to a more pragmatic worldview, which tends to be one that is more communal. And the evidences we have of that in most documented and non-documented ways is the African worldview. It's so prominent. It's the longest, the oldest one we have.
Right.
And so even Latino students and Asian students, they say like, oh, that's very familiar to what I do. Of course, it's the vestiges of humanity is within it. So like some of the things we have to think about, we're thinking about, I even kind of like hurts to say the word psychology because I'm scared people will continue to default to think about Western psychology, but we're talking about African psychology, we're talking about spirituality.
Right.
We're talking about African normality. We're talking about traditions of African people, and not just people who were born on the continent of Africa, but African people as in the African world, as in me and you. I'm from Atlanta. I'm an African person. I'm African American. I'm Black. I'm all of those things. But what Kobe Kambon talks about in a lot of his works, and he's a great contributor to African psychology, is that he goes on to say that there's even some, there's two things. There's a biogenetic sort of characteristic to the psychology that people of African descent have, right? And then he says there's a more like conscious level, non-tangible thing that like help, the way we think about wokeness, the way we operate, the things that literally influence us from day to day based on our environment or our socialization.
Right.
But that unconscious piece, the thing that you inherit, the great wisdom of the ancestors, the great wisdom of yourself as a universal energy that will never be destroyed. The memories that we've inherited, epic memory that we inherited that we don't know that we have until we tap into it, that comes from a long lineage of our family. How does that factor into our day-to-day?
Right.
And so when we really talking about being woke, and I think that's a very interesting thing.
That whole concept.
Now,
Because
it's like, I don't think it should be trivialized, because it's really a mass of people on a grassroots level being conscious of their consciousness as Black people.
Right.
And that's the step 2 part of African psychology. that's the day-to-day. I am aware of my socialization process or things that affect my behavior at the conscious level.
Yeah.
I'm aware of my racial experience. I'm aware of my cultural experience.
Right.
That is wokeness. But in African psychology, we call that self-consciousness.
Right.
The other part is the deep part that's going to help us win the war that we have failed to tap into by a large group at the mass level. And that is a deep spiritual relationship to that which is greater than ourselves and that which we have inherited from our ancestors. And once we can develop the relationship not just to society, which is a hostile relationship, but our relationship to our ancestors and our divine purpose, then we have optimal living.
I want to get in here with you because you said a lot. You said a lot. I want to ask you this question because you said a deep spiritual relationship. What about our brothers and sisters that are religious folks? I mean, when you say spiritual relationship, are you talking about religion? Are you talking about energy? Like, what are you really talking about? Because it comes up in my classes all the time. And you know, a large part of our community are either Christian or Muslim. Like, what does that look like?
Okay, that's an excellent question. One, I would argue that regardless of your belief system, which operates at your conscious level, every human being, whether you want to use science or religion to explain it, is an energy.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so when I say spirituality, I'm not per se talking about a particular tradition or human practice. I'm talking about the actual evidence we have that humans are energy forces, just like the stars, the moons, the planets, and everything else. And if you study just anatomy, you know, by effect, we know these things affect our conscious level, which is why, you know, people do sleep studies, or people take melatonin, or people, you know, can be out of circadian rhythm. It's because of the spirituality that we are, the spirits that we are, is in relationship to earth, whether we deny that existence or not.
Yeah.
You could not believe in a religious practice and you would still exist in some sort of spiritual harmony or disharmony with the planet and with the universe. To live the best way, like the trees, the stars, the moons, the seasons, and everything that comes and goes, menstruation patterns, you know, life itself, is to be in harmony with that which exists, the science of the universe. If you don't study that, you know, then again, you become an alien to your own environment. You can't live optimally. To study ourselves as spiritual beings is to really study how to create balance, how to be in better balance with that which already exists. Right. Sometimes people call themselves scientists. Maybe I'm a social scientist. But the reality is the science is all around me and I'm just participating.
Right.
I may discover, but the trees, the plants, the herbs, the medicines existed before me. Who am I to say I'm the one who discovers you? What we need to do, you know.
That's a worldview, though.
That's a worldview shift.
But, and
to not dominate, but to understand harmony.
Right, we got to understand that, though. That's a worldview, because even when you think about Western psych, Western science, Western society, it's like, no, it's I control this. Right. I maintain this. Even, you know, you brought up menstrual cycles. When I think about the I think about how a man wants to be in control of how women give birth. Like, for a woman to lay on her back to give birth, scientifically, that doesn't make much sense. Gravity doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't, right?
Right. So, like, you know, just that's a worldview shift, and I just want to uplift that again, because I think that's part of the dynamic that we're dealing with our people. Is like, how do we get people, one, to recognize that their worldview that they've been kind of connected to for so long is problematic, right? And I think sometimes when you say that, people feel attacked. And it's not an attack. I just want to share this with you. Even when you talk about the we, right? That whole we-ness is so important. You know, it makes me think about how, like, I hear people saying, I want to spend time by myself. We had a conversation the other day in this class. People were like, I want to spend time by myself. And what I was uplifting, I said, you can spend time by yourself, and knowing that when you spend time by yourself, you're still connected to your ancestors.
That's right. You're never alone.
Never alone.
Not in our worldview. Right.
But people, when they often say, they're really saying, I want to be alone.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
that's actually, that's very much a value in Western worldview. The I, the singularity, the independence, the separation. That's why we encourage children to leave home as some sort of as an emblem of success, as a rite of passage to actually depart from home and to be in the wilderness, so to speak. That's not our worldview, and guess what? We're not even winning that way. We're spending more money and we're living worse.
Living worse, it's like,
you know what I mean? It's not even practical, even if you're like, oh, I like the West. It's not even practical for black people, not here or anywhere else.
People are like, oh, I'm leaving, and I'll be like, you leaving a home to struggle?
Right.
Like you making, you know, $15 an hour and you could barely, and now you like, I'm a man, like I'm a woman, like I'm grown. But when I'm on the continent, like I just think about when I was in Richfield, and Richfield is probably one of my favorite places that I visited.
Yeah.
Outside of Mali, and so I'm looking forward to South Africa to see like how it resonates with me, right?
Okay.
But when I was in Richfield, what I appreciated is that everybody had a role in the family, and that the push was not to get out the house, but the push was to build the family up.
That's right.
And as a person that grew up here, and my mother, I always appreciate, as I've learned more about who I am as an African person, that I was able to identify things my mama did that was more African than she knew it was African. It goes back to that piece around the consciousness and unconscious. Like she was doing stuff that was African, but didn't know it. My mother's house was always open. Like anybody can come. You know me, it's like we family. That's how she is now, right? If I be like, yo, we coming in there, she's like, okay, cool. And I'm not there, you still could come. That's just how she is, right? But my mother said to me when I was 17, 18, like, you don't gotta leave home. Like, why you leaving home? This is your home. But I was grounded in Western ideas, like, I gotta be a man. I gotta be independent. I'm about to leave. So I left home at 17, right? And I was able to do fine, but I know I didn't do fine by myself. I had help, I had love, I had support. So it was still the we. I'm never gonna be like, I did it by myself, right? So I think that framing for me is so important, just around us understanding how if we have a different understanding, then we also make different meanings.
That's right. That's a really good point. And I feel like, give you an example, there's things that black families already do, but it's been problematized by Western norms. And so even just knowing, oh, actually what I do is good or normal, or associating it with different things would alleviate so much depression, anxiety, and abandonment. For example, black people already create fictive kin and larger networks for support. We already make homeboy down the street, oh, that's my cousin. Like we familiarize people in a very intimate way. We make people who are non-biological family. They come to dinner, they they go to the holidays with us. And it's normal for us to have mama and grandma and auntie in the house. Right? In any sense, in any study of African family networks, this is actually normal. But in America, it's seen as a bastardized family or a malfunctioning family that, oh, you got people from all over, or you have multiple generations in one house, or, you know, cousin live in the basement and stuff. That's actually a normal practice. And for multiple cultures, especially Africans. And so even if we just accept it, like, we are not inferior in that way in our practice. It's actually more humane. That alone, I think, starts to free people up from seeing themselves as damaged goods. And we've been under, that's oppression, that's racism. To take what is absolutely normal about you and to understand it as something that is dysfunctional. That's affected us greatly. That's 50% of it. The point of education, at least half of it, is to make you a confident person, I think. If you go through years of schooling and you leave less confident than you came, you have been failed. And you are in some type of cultural system that is anti-African, anti-you.
Well, Dr. Akbar talks about that. He says in his book that education should make you feel good about yourself.
Absolutely.
That it should validate your existence.
Yeah, any people who are self-determining people who could choose their own education would not choose an education that would make them look inferior to the world. That's how you know we messed up.
But I also, you know, like going back to the African personality,
Yes.
It has been said that in studies of African personality that vibe and intuition is a form of knowledge. And we've somewhat form of knowledge, right? And that has been seen as the most valuable form of knowledge because you get a degree, you can make money from it. But something as simple as your intuition, sometimes we don't give enough credit to as a form of intelligence.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, you make meaning stuff all the time. You see somebody walking down the street, they got it, you know, they got etchy energy. You like, oh, I'm gonna go on this side of the street. That's a form of intelligence, right?
Absolutely.
But I also think that in terms of intuition, spirit and being grounded in your spirit allows that to resonate on a different level for you.
That's right.
But I'm not sure if people know how to feed that.
So check it. I agree with you, but I also kind of disagree.
Okay.
Because I feel like of all the people I encounter, particularly in this country, I feel like black people have the strongest orientation to intuition and that second sense. And I think because we're socialized to believe that it is actually real. Now, sometimes that can get calcified as we age because, you know, the things that we say are practical fight against the spiritual worldview that we have.
Yeah.
But for example, even in our own language, in Ebonics, black people have created language to say things that didn't even exist before, like, oh, I feel you, bruh.
Right.
We already inclined to talk about our feelings more than just knowing. In fact, our feelings are more intelligent than what we know, because our feelings actually is information from that which we don't have access to, or that which we haven't come to know yet, which is our ancestors and other spiritual wisdom. And so to give credence to that is everything. You know, my mind is limited, but to have a sense of things, to have a spiritual knowing is actually more intelligent. But to give credence to it is the most intelligent thing to do. So we say, oh, I ain't feeling that, or I feel you, bruh,
Right.
or I feel a type of way.
Right.
And even if my mind cannot articulate why I feel a type of way, my orientation and my connection to spirit has already told me the end decision.
Right.
That's intelligent.
No, absolutely. I'm in agreement with you. I think maybe what I see is that we don't acknowledge that enough.
That's true.
Right.
It's absolutely brushed off by like Western science education systems.
Yeah.
Even how you perform professionalism is absolutely unacknowledged.
Yeah.
But I think the reason why black people continue to be humane despite, you know, the way people treat us and the way we continue to find joy is because in our at least in our communities and the way we socialize our children, we continue to give credence to that. So like, it wouldn't be strange to be at a black person's house and somebody be like, yo, I had a dream and da da da. So I don't think I'm gonna go.
Yeah.
But actually, I mean, we take that for granted, but like in other people's households, they would be like, that's not logical, you sound stupid. You had a dream about something, now you're not gonna come with us?
Yeah.
But we don't realize, again, the consciousness versus the actual practice of Africanity, we don't realize that's an African thing, and that's completely normal in our households for people to have those type of inclinations, or to, for people to feel like, you know, they have access to people who have passed, or people come visit them, or, you know, they have a sense about things. We especially respect that when it comes from older folks. That's already there.
But that's and that beauty for me, I want us as a community to reconnect with, right? Malcolm talks about it. He says, you're more African than you ever know. You just don't know what it means to be African.
Right.
And so for me, it's like opening up these spaces so we can have dialogue, connecting folks with proper texts.
That's right.
Proper scholarship, elders, mamas, big mamas, grandfathers in our community that hold this wisdom, right? Because it's there. So many people in our community have it, but so many of them don't. As a person that's in education, that's working with young people, I see it. I see the brilliance, I see the beauty, and I'm seeing more of themselves sometimes than they're seeing of themselves. And I think that's where our work lies. You know? Absolutely.
I feel like it is absolutely our duty, if we are doing any justice to Black studies, Africana studies, or anything that we have created on our own terms, it is absolutely our duty to be able to teach, facilitate, acknowledge, affirm, and direct the people we have contact with in ways that are self-determining, in ways that make our lives more free. And then if we were to define freedom for ourselves, what would that be? And it's always very interesting to me to think about that, because as an African American, you know, most of how we, African Americans as an ethnic group, how we have learned to understand ourselves is as a captive people.
Yeah.
And so we don't have a lot of strong memory or collective memory around being free people.
Yeah.
It's more of like a dream state. But sovereignty would be important for us. And then Black studies, I feel like these are maroon spaces. These are spaces of sovereignty where we decide what's going to be the best decisions for us as a collective or even as an individual.
Yeah.
And if we can't answer those questions for ourselves, who are we? Who are we to the ancestors? Who are we to the future generation? But these would be the silos where we will have the time to think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something we take for granted. We think that anytime you're in school, you're thinking. And this is not the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
Outside of Black studies, when we put our children in these spaces, in these laboratories that we call institutions, they are not given the time to think. They're actually becoming well-adjusted, you know, Westerners. But they are not given the time to think autonomously.
Right.
And that's what's important about us, about any liberation movements that we have, grassroots movements we have, Black studies departments that we have, is this is our CIA. This is our time to think about what will be progressive for us as a people, you know, notwithstanding the pressures of adapting to someone else's cultural norms.
Well, I wanna move us forward, and I usually ask my guests one question, and the question that I often pose to them: what do you feel like your role is? You know, you're a scholar, you're an educator. By your language sounds, you're an activist as well, right? Mm-hmm. That all being said, those are formal titles, right?
Yeah.
What do you see as being your role in our community?
I do feel like my role, given the privileges maybe that I've had to study and to live amongst our people, is to make the proper decisions that allow me to be a model, but to simultaneously work within our population in order to get free. That is definitely my goal, and simultaneously my role is to, if I could make it like a hashtag, like to constantly and perpetually raise awareness in ways that progress our people towards the liberation we deserve.
Thank you, thank you. Moving to our last segment, a moment of truth. It's just a segment we get a chance to share out what we think on this topic. Is something that's truthful, something that we need to hear, something that folks need to understand about this topic of African psychology, African personality.
Right. I would drop one on what's kind of influenced me with the idea of there being an African personality is that I think that it's probably the most popular one on the planet, to be honest. And African Americans are probably the most popular people on the planet, and we don't even we don't necessarily propagate ourselves that way. But if we are probably one of the most popular group of people on the planet, we must study our personalities, because people are modeling them, and in that way we shift the power dynamic to come to understand that human behavior is not just based on the capitalist system and so on. Like, we have the potential to not only change ourselves, but to change the dynamics of what's normal around the globe, you know?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll offer this piece. In the words of some of our ancestors that are practitioners of African psychology, what's most important that comes to me in this moment of truth is thinking about how your worldview should reflect the survival of your group, meaning that your values, your behaviors, your actions should all be centralized around the existence of the whole. And if it's not, you need to check it. And you know, I think we need to check our rituals, check our practices, check our values, how we're dealing with each other. But your worldview is something that we should really begin to focus on, because the worldview offers us a different way of life. This is a moment of truth.